Happy Friday, folks. Senior editor Mackenzie Taylor here on the Texan's weekly Roundup podcast. This week, the team discusses the debate between Austin's mayoral candidates over the homeless, police, and more. A pro-casino PAC donating over $100,000 to Republicans and Democrats alike. Comptroller Hager calling for stronger laws against children attending sexualized events. Federal prison sentences for drug traffickers, one of whom was a Mexican government official. An audit of Brownsville's proposed power plant revealing false pretenses for rate hikes. A former Texas school principal being found not guilty on charges of official oppression and evidence tampering. Brazos County commissioners taking a page out of Harris County's book with a quorum bust. How local officials throughout Texas enforce gambling laws differently regarding game rooms. Corpus Christi's new wildlife rescue center adjacent to the Texas State Aquarium, and the admonishment of a Texas judge for referring to COVID-19 as the China virus. As always, if you have questions for our team, DM us on Twitter or email us at editor@thetexan.news. We'd love to answer your questions on a future podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Howdy, folks. Mackenzie here with Brad and Hayden and Matthew. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Brad, you've seen Turnpike Troubadours, right?
Yeah.
In concert?
Indeed.
Which was a very big deal as they came back after years of not having toured.
Yeah, because the head singer was an alcoholic, I think.
Yeah, he had to go to rehab. It was really sad.
But he's better now.
Yes, which is awesome. So
Yeah.
they're back out, and I know it made big waves in on the Texas country music scene. I'm seeing them tonight. I'm so excited.
Where at?
New Braunfels, like the Whitewater Amphitheater.
Cool.
Now, I also forgot that this concert was happening until last night. But we remembered, and now we're going.
Well, that's a good thing to have remembered, like instead of remembering that you left your car keys somewhere else you can't find.
Yes.
You
remember
now have
in
this
advance.
surprise trip to New Braunfels to see Turnpike Troubadours.
Yes. Yeah, it'll be great. I'm very excited. Have you seen Flatland Calvary?
No.
Okay.
I saw Robert Earl Keen
Ooh,
with Turnpike.
that's so fun.
Yeah, it was good concert.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that sounds delightful. And I will report back with you about how it was and how it went and all those things. I'm pretty pumped.
As you should be.
Okay, folks. Well, let's jump right into the news. Brad, let's start with the city of Austin. You watched a debate between the mayoral candidates this week. Give us a brief review of what went down.
So 6 candidates were on stage for the debate, including frontrunners Kirk Watson, Celia Israel, and Jennifer Verdon. They discussed issues like homelessness, the city's relationship with the Austin Police Department and the department's staffing problems, housing, transportation, Project Connect, and property taxes, along with some others.
Which a lot of those connect in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, really the big theme of this was coping with the city's massive growth. And really, that is at root of all of these issues. It can be tied to quite literally every single one. Some, it is the entire thing, like housing. Like, how do we deal with, I think the number is like 180 people moving here every day. And then there's transportation. Road traffic's really bad. Although it's still, in my opinion, it's not as bad as it was before the pandemic. There's Project Connect, the massive light rail plan that is now costing even more money than it was originally projected to. And so all of these issues kind of dovetail into the population growth that Austin is seeing. And with that, the rising cost of living and purchasing housing and everything like that. So those were the big issues. Watson seemed to take the most arrows of any candidate. He is widely seen as the frontrunner, and he didn't really return fire much. He would interject and say, I'd like to respond to that, but he never really attacked either Israel or Verdon.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like I said, he responded to them, but never went at them. Whereas the other two really went at Watson, especially. But the two women in that race, Israel and Verdon, both went at each other too. So it was pretty contentious. There were 3 candidates that are kind of backbenchers, both literally and figuratively, because they were in the
back
bench
bleacher.
of
Yeah.
of the platform that the TV station had set up. And so really most consider the campaign a 2-horse race between Watson and Israel. Verdon is much more conservative than either of the other candidates. And I mean, if we're being honest, she's probably much more conservative than the Austin electorate. Now, it doesn't mean she doesn't share priorities like, the reinstatement of the camping ban in 2021. I think that's when that happened. It's all running together now.
Yeah.
That she was very much in favor of that. And so it's not like she doesn't share anything with Austin voters. It's not like, she's the most conservative member of the Texas legislature that you'd find that really wouldn't have any shot.
Right.
But she definitely is not as likely to win as the other two. Watson also has cash on hand advantage. He's raised over $1 million, and he's been in office for a very long time, or he was in office for a very long time. He also previously served as mayor. So
State senator,
mayor, ran for attorney general.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, and so if no candidate eclipses 50% next month, there will be a runoff, and the ultimate winner will be on the ballot again in 24, all of which said they would seek re-election if they'd won in 24. And the reason that is, normally it's a 4-year term, but because of redistricting last year, or that happened, last year, 21, they will be on the ballot again. It's kind of similar to what they do in the state Senate, I think, where everyone's up. Although with this, it's just the mayor, because there are also some council members that are not up. So that is the reason. And at that point, they'll be running for a 4-year term. So, you can read the article for all the different policy positions that they took.
And, go to the Texan.news. Check it out. Any final observations?
Yeah, so housing has really become the biggest issue in this race, I would say, for the reason I talked about with population growth and how do we fit all these people. But it really highlights this odd dichotomy in Austin where it's very progressive, and progressives typically do not like strict zoning codes. And this gets really deep in the weeds. It's not something a lot of people understand because it is so dense and difficult to understand, just basically. But then you also have Austin's affluence, which when you have that, you're not single family unit neighborhoods, what we think of as neighborhoods with houses, they are typically loath to have, like apartment buildings built in their neighborhood, most especially because it coincides with crime. It doesn't mean every apartment complex is going to be ridden with crime, but it does introduce A, more people, and B, people lower on the socioeconomic status, and that correlates with crime. And so you have this internal fight between, do we embrace the progressiveness of what typical doctrine holds as the right policy on this kind of thing, on zoning, or do we embrace the fact that we don't want all this crime or the prospect of crime in our neighborhoods? And so it's really they're really at loggerheads here, and it really brings out a lot of vitriol, and that is playing out in the mayor's race.
Absolutely. Well, Bradley, thank you for watching that for us, and so we don't have to, and writing all about it. And folks, go read it at the Texan.news to get all the details. Hayden, what is Texas Sands, and why do they have their sights set on the Texas legislature?
This year, there's been a lot of money going into the campaigns of lawmakers in both parties from the casino gambling industry, as Texas is one of the largest states that does not allow casino gambling. And Texas Sands is a political action committee here in Texas that is funded by Dr. Miriam Adelson, who is the widow of Sheldon Adelson, a prominent Trump supporter, and she is one of the wealthiest people in the world and the majority shareholder of Las Vegas Sands, which is the leader in the casino gambling industry. The PAC was set up specifically to advocate for commercial casino legalization here in Texas and to persuade lawmakers to propose a constitutional amendment in November to lift the state's casino ban and allow a limited number of casinos and set up a state gaming commission that would license the industry, license commercial casinos, and regulate the industry. So Texas Sands is more or less an arm of a Nevada-based corporation that is seeking to enact a significant policy change here at the Capitol.
Yeah. So give us an overview of their financial involvement in this year's elections.
More than $1.5 million has gone to Republican and Democratic candidates, most of whom are incumbents, in this year's election cycle before the primary, before the runoff, this summer, and then last month there was a new round of contributions to incumbents in the Texas legislature. Most of that cash came from, or all of that cash came from the Adelson family, the Adelson fortune. And we've talked about this before on this podcast, but just to give an idea of the scope of their influence, they own the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which is the main newspaper in Las Vegas. So they have a lot of burners on the stove, and not sure if I'm using that expression correctly, but they have
irons in the fire.
They have a lot of irons in the fire, and their influence reaches a long way. And most of the candidates they backed during the primaries won their elections, and they are seemingly playing it safe and backing candidates that are likely to win in the general election as well.
What is notable about the recent list of names who received campaign cash?
The contributions that were made in September to Texas lawmakers were relatively modest. They were between $3,000 and $5,000, but they did cut a $50,000 check to Governor Abbott's reelection bid, which is a little bit ironic considering Abbott has been in opposition to casinos in the past, and he has led efforts to keep the federally recognized Native American tribes here in Texas from expanding their gambling operations. They have at times pushed the gray areas in state law and in federal statutes that permit them to engage in activities that would be illegal for other companies or the general public. And Abbott has supported pushing back on that and asserting the state's right to regulate that activity and to prohibit certain gambling activities. Abbott has, in other words, not been a friend of the pro-casino efforts, but he received a $50,000 check for his reelection campaign. Beto O'Rourke has said that he supports casinos and would be in favor of letting Texas voters decide that question on a statewide ballot, but he did not receive a check from Texas Sands, and that could be viewed as a strategic choice on their part because, of course, the polling does favor Governor Abbott in next month's election, and it probably wouldn't be a smart move for them to upset his camp or to do something that might rub him the wrong way. But the lieutenant governor's race has also received attention financially from Texas Sands. Dan Patrick received $150,000, and so did Speaker Phelan, but neither of those men received another contribution on the latest report. They did receive contributions earlier this year. Mike Collier, Patrick's opponent, also did not receive a contribution. So while Patrick did not get a donation this time, neither did his opponent, but he has been supported by this group in the past.
There you go. Hayden, thank you for following all of that for us. Bradley, after a lengthy back and forth over businesses hosting drag events with children in attendance, Comptroller Glenn Hager came out with a call to action. What did he say?
So for much of the summer, Hager's office has been evaluating whether it can charge a Dallas gay bar backdated fees associated with sexually oriented businesses after it hosted a drag event at which children were present. So he came out this week indicating he did not have the authority to fine that business, Mr. in Dallas, and nor did he have the authority to fine others for similar events due to recent court decisions that have broadly defined clothed in statute, so much so that something like spray-on latex even counts as clothed. And so that severely limits the scope of what you can qualify as violating this or exceeding this threshold in code. And so the fine itself is, I think, a $5 fee per entrant. And so however many people there were at this event would be taxed, $5 a head, basically, or the business would be taxed $5 a head, and they'd have to pay that if Hager had decided that he could move forward with this action. But he didn't. And then he called, he then called on the legislature to more clearly define in code what constitutes clothed. That way, this court decision would basically be nullified after a new law passed by the legislature. Or he called on them to come up with some other way to clamp down on businesses doing these things. State code already prohibits children at sexually oriented from entering sexually oriented businesses like a strip club or something like that. Now this is a bar, and so it is not typically the business that meets that standard, which is why this debate is happening. But the comptroller found that, as currently constituted, this instance at Mr. did not meet that qualification, and therefore they're now in this quandary. What do we do about this?
So then, how was this perceived by conservative activist groups that have been drawing attention to the situation? I mean, this is a huge issue that Hager, surprisingly, has been facing a lot of pressure on behalf of the comptroller. Is not usually the elected official facing controversy on these kinds of social issues.
Right. He's just a fiscal manager, essentially. But he does have some authority to enforce laws that are already in place.
And this one happens to pertain to the situation.
Yes. And so Chris Hopper of the Texas Family Project said after Hager's statement came out, "Today's statement from Glenn Hager is a win for conservatives. We disagree with Hager's decision not to find Mr. and have always believed that current state law is far from adequate and that all of the other drag shows in Texas are sadly legal until the legislature takes action." So Hopper's group, along with the American Principles Project, have criticized Hager on this issue quite a bit over the summer for what they see as, quote, dragging his feet on the investigation. But they agree with the contention about code, just disagree that Mr. the situation there did not meet the qualifications for a sexually oriented business. And the reason is that, without going into too much graphic detail, what separates this event from the others is how covered up the rear end of one of the performers was. And, if you really want to see it, it's all over Twitter. You can see the videos, judge for yourself. I linked to them in this article and the previous one I wrote. But that is what separates in Hopper's mind this issue from the others, and in Hager's. That's the reason that this one was singled out more than any other for evaluation. He just disagrees with the activist's assessment that it meets this qualification. So this appears likely to be a theme once the legislature reconvenes next year. That, along with a number of other related issues, such as like gender mod or topics like this being discussed in school, sexual topics in schools. This is it's kind of going to be an umbrella issue that we're going to see a lot of specific pieces of legislation try and make its way through.
Absolutely. And it'll be very fascinating to watch which legislators are the ones heading up that.
Yeah. Which ones file the bills, which ones, fight the fight on the floor.
We know Brian Slayton will be one of them.
Yes.
Who else will join the fight will be very interesting. And how how big of an issue it becomes during session will also be interesting from the Democrat side of, okay, how hard are we going to fight against this?
And which ones do they fight against? Which ones do they say just throw up their hands?
Right.
So.
And which do leaders throw weight behind? How much teeth do they have? It'll be fascinating to see. Well, Radley, thank you for that. We'll talk a little bit more about this issue later on in the podcast. Matthew, we are coming to you. Federal authorities in South Texas handed down prison sentences in a number of drug trafficking cases, including one instance where the trafficker was not only an illegal alien, but a former high-ranking official in the Mexican government. Some spicy stuff there. Can you give us the details of what happened?
Testing. Can you hear this? Hear me through this fancy new microphone that my bosses got me?
Woo! Look at that. You sound great, Matt.
Yes, I love it. Let's see here. So this was an interesting story. federal authorities had a number of undercover law enforcement operations where they caught drug traffickers in a couple of different instances. With the former Mexican government official, what happened here was the trafficker in question used to be a attorney in the Mexican government Office of the Attorney General for some 30 years. And during the undercover operation, he met with undercover law enforcement officers where they managed to buy a kilo of cocaine from him. And he told them that he had more product. Based on that buy, they went, secured a search warrant, went and raided his house where they found 30 kilos of cocaine with an estimated street value of $800,000. After he was convicted and sentenced for his drug smuggling crimes, the judge pointed out, that as a 30-year attorney, he knew better. And that's why they handed him a pretty stiff sentence in that case. In the second case, 3 traffickers were caught planning to smuggle narcotics into the country during another undercover operation, notably called Operation Dart Monkey. Why it was called Operation Dark Monkey, we have no idea, but I guess you have to name your undercover operation something.
Was it a misspelling of dark money? Someone added a K.
And you're saying dart, like a blow dart.
Like a dart, like a dartboard, and a monkey.
Not dark.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what else to compare.
Imagine being the person that gets to come up with these.
But Operation Dart Monkey darted themselves I'm trying to think of a good analogy here to keep it going. Darted themselves a monkey, I guess. With the 3 monkeys in this case, the smugglers. With one had a known connections to narcotics operations out of Mexico, where he was getting his sources of narcotics. And I guess as part of the operation, they figured out that he was going to smuggle this stuff up and had enough to get them all on the conspiracy aspect of things. So well done, federal law enforcement in that case. They handed down numerous lengthy sentences in all of these different instances. And it's a great story you can check out on thetexan.news.
Woo, I love the plug. Speaking of plugs, hey listeners, if you enjoy our podcast each week, subscribe to The Texan. We're not funded by corporate interests or big donors, so we rely on the subscriptions of everyday Texans to keep churning out news. When you subscribe to The Texan, you'll get access to stories, like all the ones we've been discussing on this podcast, as soon as they're published, so that you can stay informed, up to speed, and ready to vote at the ballot box. A subscription is $9 monthly, but you can save by purchasing an annual subscription for $90, which comes out to just $7.50 per month. And we just brought back a fan favorite merch item. New subscribers will now get a free Fake News Stops Here mug, by far our most popular merch item of all time. For more details, visit thetexan.news/subscribe or click the URL in the description of this podcast. Now let's jump back to chatting about some stories. Bradley, we're coming right back to you. There is a scandalous situation occurring down in the Rio Grande Valley. Give us the lowdown.
So an audit was released that details the events, actions, and statements surrounding a power plant in Brownsville that was never built, but for which fee increases were levied on ratepayers. And so overall, about $118 million in extra fees were paid by Brownsville Public Utilities Board ratepayers over the course of 4 or 5 years. And this occurred in midway through last decade. I think it started in 2013 and concluded. The last one stopped in 2016, 2017. So that's the lifespan of the fee increases. The power plant was never built, and even though all the negotiations occurred and the corresponding rate hike to help pay for it went in place. And so after these negotiations, they tried to move forward with this, but the problem was, as this audit found and listed out, the load and population forecasts used to justify the plant were outdated, if not outright contrived. And so there's a lot of detail to it. I go into it in the article. So I recommend you read that to hear all of the different things that were lied about or misled, or just masked to the Public Utilities Board members and the public at large. And so another part of this includes a former Enron executive that was paid $35,000 per month indefinitely, meaning there was no cap on the contract length or amount of money spent, to consult on the project, which the auditors found to be a conflict of interest. And so overall, there's just is one of the wildest things I've ever read, especially something usually so boring, well, until a year ago, usually so boring as a power plant and electricity. But there's a lot of backroom dealing and masking of the situation overall, misleading by especially the CEO of the Brownsville Public Utility Board, and other consultants that were involved in the process, and so including the former mayor, Tony Martinez. And so it's just kind of a shocking read. And I linked to the whole thing in the article if you want to read it, or the executive summary, or you can just read the article, but it really is something.
So what have the reactions been to this?
So Cameron County is ablaze with the story right now, and rightfully so. It reeks of poor management at best and corruption at worst. It's being used in the Cameron County judge race between Democrat Eddie Trevino and Republican Carlos Cascos. Cascos is a former Texas Secretary of State. Trevino's firm was among the team of lawyers paid by Brownsville Public Utility Board during this. The audit found no evidence of fraud associated with the payments to him or to any of the other legal or legal firms that provided advice, or any of the other outside vendors that assisted with this. But Trevino made $1.3 million in legal fees. And so his involvement right there has made it an issue in that race. For its part, Brownsville Public Utility Board put out a statement saying there are factual errors in the report, but did not specify any at the time. They said that they'll conduct a review of it and in time put their own counter factuals out. And they said that they wanted to allow the individuals mentioned in the audit time to respond themselves to the allegations that made in this. But right now they're just kind of saying, no, this is not true, and leaving it at that, not providing any more details. So it is catching the eyes of many people down in the Rio Grande Valley, and this is the fallout from this, I think, is going to continue for a while, and may catch up some officials down there in it.
Certainly. Well, folks, it's definitely worth a read, so make sure to go to the Texan and read all about it. Hayden, we're coming to you. An East Texas school principal was vindicated by a jury of her peers last week. What was Kimberlyn Snyder accused of?
Kimberlyn Snyder is the principal of Natchez Elementary School out in Anderson County. I should say she is on administrative leave after she was indicted in January of 2021 on multiple charges, one of which was a felony count of tampering or fabricating physical evidence with intent to impair. And she also had 5 misdemeanor charges of official oppression. If she had been convicted of all of those counts, she could have been incarcerated for more than a decade. But the jury returned verdicts of not guilty on each of those charges. They were connected to an investigation into a sexual assault the prosecutor said she inhibited, but they originally accused her of hampering an investigation into the sex abuse of a child that had been suspected. But the day before the case went to the jury, the state reportedly conceded that the investigation in question did not involve a child, so they had to correct the indictment to reflect the fact that there were no children involved in the suspected sex abuse that she was accused of inhibiting the investigation of. So that was a mark against the state heading into the verdict. But those charges, as I mentioned, one of which was a felony, could have put her away for a long time. I'm sure she's breathing a sigh of relief after she was acquitted completely and is now free and no longer under criminal indictment.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the reaction to the verdict?
Of course, there were people who were disappointed with the outcome, not the least of which was a group called Changes for Neches, which is an interest group there locally that has opposed her for years and has sought to spotlight some of the accusations of misconduct against her. There were children who testified against her in this trial, and Caitlin Scroggins, who is the leader of the group and now running for an HSISD school board, put out a statement. She said, and part of that statement was, quote, "The faces of these girls and their parents as the verdict was read was heart-wrenching. They did their part and thought justice would be served. So many people that had been victimized by her over decades, and they thought finally something would be done. We mourn for them and send strength," end quote. And the trial had originally been scheduled to be completed in March, but her attorney had a medical emergency and it was repeatedly postponed. Her attorney, after the trial, said that they expected the jury to vindicate her, and they were not surprised by the verdict because after viewing the evidence, he believed that once a jury received the case, that she would be acquitted. Of course, he had the benefit of hindsight, and he had just won the victory. So it's arguably easy to say, we won, and I always knew we were going to win.
Yeah.
But that was a victory lap he, I'm sure, was enjoying right after the trial. And interestingly enough, I emailed him for a statement in the summer, and he never got back to me. But right after, or I think the day after the jury verdict was handed down, he replied to my email and said she was just found not guilty. And so I thought,
my goodness.
Well, that would have been interesting. I wish I had heard the prediction before the verdict. That would have been a lot more fun. But he did get back with me and let me know that she had been acquitted.
There you go. Well, the $1 million question, could she be reinstated as school principal?
Part of the controversy in this case was her husband was the superintendent of the school district and was accused of shielding her from some of this scrutiny. And he made the decision to keep her on paid administrative leave throughout these court proceedings. And though Snyder's attorney told me he has no idea whether she's going to be reinstated, he did indicate to me that the school board could consider it as early as Monday. And she is an employee of the school district. So not only has she been free from the specter of prison, but she might even get her career back. And I'm sure that is something that many of her opponents and those who have accused her of misconduct in the school district are not too excited about. And there's always the point that even if what she was accused of was not criminal, there are possible ethics violations that may have been committed. I don't know what those might be, but she has been found not guilty and could be resuming her career very soon.
I think the stories that often get the most attention on our site are, we love a good story about Ken Paxton or Greg Abbott or the legislature doing something crazy, but I love these local stories that are so just dense with drama. They really are so fascinating and of great consequence to the people in these communities and so worth reading. And
where everybody knows each other, because these statewide things, people don't necessarily know all the players involved, but I doubt there's anybody who has a child in that school district who does not have an opinion about Kimberlyn Snyder.
Yeah.
And who is not aware of what some of the local media has been reporting in terms of what she could have done or might have done. And these reports go back years. When I was originally researching the story, one of the reports I saw was back in 2014, 2015, of her possibly intimidating people or even bullying elementary school students at this school and just being overbearing. And that's why she's unpopular with a lot of people and has this interest group that is virtually dedicated to opposing her.
Yeah.
Is because of some of the opponents she has accumulated over the years in the school district that culminated in the local DA wanting to charge her with a crime. Having said that, we always in our reporting presume innocence before the trial, and now we presume innocence after the trial because the jury was clear that the state didn't prove she did anything illegal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hayden, thank you for shining a spotlight on what's going on in this case. We appreciate it so much. Bradley, we're coming back to you. Two Brazos County commissioners are imitating the situation out in Harris County right now that specifically relates to breaking quorum to prevent a property tax increase. What's going on?
So Commissioners Steve Aldrich and Russ Ford are amidst a weeks-long bout of playing hooky, avoiding a quorum to set a tax rate. In code, local governments must have a quorum to pass a tax increase. If no quorum exists, the no new revenue rate is automatically adopted. Because they're few in number, county commissions must have 4 of 5 members present to establish a quorum, and thus only 2 can prevent one. So that makes counties much more susceptible to this maneuver. If you're in a city council with 10 members, you need more people than just 2 to band together to do this. And so that's why we're seeing this really happen at the county level and nowhere else that I've heard.
Yeah.
So if no rate is passed, no quorum established by October 22nd, which by the time this goes out will be the very next day, Saturday, then the no new revenue rate will automatically be adopted. The point of contention is over this pot of money that is, I think, like $7 million that is set to go into a capital contingency fund that the county judge wants to use to finance small capital expenditures down the road, rather than setting a bond election to borrow more money. Use the money that's already there. But the 2 commissioners, Aldrich and Ford, contend that they don't want to raise taxes when the county doesn't need it. They will be fine missing out on this windfall that the county judge wants to ensure comes in. And they say that basically that Dwayne Peters, the county judge, his claims of roads being repaired and whatnot, projects like that, gutters at county facilities not being fixed, it's not accurate that the county will still be able to finance those things. So that's where the lines come down on.
How did this get to this point?
So County Judge Dwayne Peters originally proposed a rate that would amount to roughly an $83 increase in the county portion of their tax bill for a homeowner with a standard exemption. Now, whenever we discuss these things, homeowners are not the only ones that pay property taxes. And so, they get preferential treatment from state code because frankly, it's a feel good thing. Like you don't want to be taxed out of your home, right? And so there's a lot of homestead exemptions and increases in those that are granted by the legislature. And so you can understand that. That's a fact, and you can understand why they do it. But, like businesses pay property taxes. And so I put that number in there, $83, because it's a way for an average person that maybe not a business owner or, more people own homes, pay these property taxes than own a business. So it's easier to conceptualize the effect of these different rates on it. But the standard business owner is going to pay more than an $83 property tax increase if the originally proposed rate would have been adopted. Now that's no longer on the table. Aldrich and Ford proposed a rate that was higher than the no new revenue rate that would yield a roughly $5 decrease as of my calculation. Now they picked that as the point at which the median homeowner would not see any change in their property tax bill. The reason the calculation varies is based on which housing price you set as the median level. I used one that was I think it was Redfin. They probably used the appraisal district, which was not immediately available. So regardless, it'll be about the same. But then Peters, the county judge, returned with a proposal that would yield a $39 increase roughly. And they've kind of been locked there ever since. Both sides are standing pat on those proposals, and the clock seems primed to run out before Saturday, at which point the county judge gets an even lower rate than what those two commissioners have proposed and said they will compromise on. I asked him why. I asked Peters why, and he said he didn't want to be a part of running the rate down lower than he already has compromised on at that roughly $39 option, and didn't really go into more of why he would take and from his point of view, the lesser of the bad options of their proposal and the no new revenue rate. Instead, he's going to, I guess, just suck it up and deal with the NNR. And so take that for what you will. Brazos County is enveloped in this growing trend of commissioners breaking quorum in order to prevent a property tax increase. First instance I saw this happen was Lubbock in 2019. Harris County commissioners immediately did it shortly after that. And two commissioners in Harris County, Cagle and is it Ramsey now?
Yes.
They're in the midst of their own quorum break for this property tax thing.
Which
so
Holly Hansen is covering for us down in Harris County.
Holly's written a lot on this. And there's a lot more going on in Harris County involving the tax rate and the police budget and all this stuff. So I recommend you check that out. Check out her coverage. But this is an interesting dynamic here. It's not Republicans revolting against Democrats. This is Republicans revolting against Republicans. And so just as occurred out in Lubbock in 2019. So it's an interesting case, and we might see more and more examples of this as the years go by.
Certainly. Thank you, Bradley. Matthew, we are coming back to you and your fancy microphone. Game rooms featuring casino-style 8-liner slot machines have popped up in Texas cities across the state. Problem is, gambling is generally regarded as illegal in Texas. Explain to us the loopholes in Texas law that have allowed these game rooms to flourish in some local jurisdictions and face prosecution in others.
Well, hello again, Mackenzie. I'd be glad to tell you about this story. It's kind of a fun thing. We have this other story about Las Vegas Sands wanting to come in with big-time gambling, and all the little guys seem to have figured out a loophole to go ahead and set up shop, at least in a lot of different jurisdictions, because we're having a lot of different enforcement policies in different jurisdictions. So here's the deal, which is a great analogy now that I think about it. Game rooms featuring casino-style 8-liner slot machines. So you put the coin in, pull the lever, the little cherries pop up, and you win something. Have popped up in Texas cities all across the state. We spoke with a number of different officials about what they're seeing across there, in particular, Odessa Mayor Javier Hoven. Now, Javier Hoven just led a charge in the city of Odessa to crack down on the game rooms, and he told us that, one, he just wanted to outright ban them because, in his view, Texas law prohibits gambling, no exceptions. But he ended up getting some pushback from other local officials who are above him. And so they ended up having to find a way to phase them out via a regulatory process. Now, according to Mayor Hoven, he said that Texas law, the loopholes that have allowed them to set up shop, there's two different ones. One, they have this provision in the penal code that was added there in the 90s called the fuzzy animal exception. And what that says is that there's essentially a defense to prosecution to having an illegal gambling machine, that sort of thing, as long as non-cash prizes under $5 in value are awarded, which is typically thought of as like the little adorable teddy bears that you win at the state fair at Chuck E. Cheese. And I think that was the purpose of the legislature adding that exception in there, so that the goers to Chuck E. Cheese and those different places weren't criminalized under our very stringent gambling rules. The other exception is that counties and cities started issuing licenses for game rooms. And they figured out that we can raise a bunch of money, revenue with that. And so you see in these jurisdictions that are licensing, charging $1,000 for an application and several $100s per machine and raking in hundreds of thousands of dollars in licensing fees, depending on the different jurisdiction. And these game rooms are supposedly supposed to be operating under this furry animal exception, non-cash prizes, but they can afford these exorbitant licensing fees. So we ended up reaching out across the state and talking to a number of different district attorneys, including the Ector County District Attorney Dusty Gallivan, whose jurisdiction includes the city of Odessa. And he says that the laws regarding whether or not they can just crack down and stop these game rooms from operating, from even having these 8-liner machines and all this sort of stuff, it's just not clear enough. And that either the Texas Supreme Court or the Texas legislature needs to come in and I think he described it as none of this middle of the road stuff. Let's either make it legal or illegal and clearly define the law. On the flip side, we spoke with Smith County District Attorney Jacob Putman, whose jurisdiction includes the city of Tyler, and he described how a number of years ago these game rooms started popping up all over their city, and they took a look at the law and they said, yeah, no, this is illegal. So they sent them all cease and desist letters. And said, you have so much time to shut down. Otherwise, you could be charged and your machines seized. Most complied with the letter. There were a few who didn't, and they made good on their threat and charged some of them and seized their machines. And according to him, those convictions stuck. So in his view, there's not too much ambiguity in the law. Like he feels that it's still pretty clear and that, you can charge and get a conviction on the issue. Both district attorneys and the mayor spoke about a case arising out of Fort Worth, where the city of Fort Worth passed ordinances to try and rein in the number of game rooms that were popping up across the city, and the game rooms sued, challenging the city's authority to rein them in. And something that came up in the suit is the constitutionality of the furry animal exception and whether or not the legislature even has the authority under the mandate that the Texas Constitution places on the Texas legislature to prohibit gambling, and a number of these other questions where this kind of gray area of the law has arisen. Ultimately, the city of Fort Worth prevailed at the Second Court of Appeals, and the game room owners have filed 2 extension of time notices with the Texas Supreme Court saying, we plan to appeal to the Supreme Court. Our attorneys are just busy with other cases, and so the latest one asked for an extension of time till November the 4th to appeal. And so we'll see if they manage to get their appeal in and whether or not the Texas Supreme Court picks up the case and provides some better clarity on these laws.
Well, Matt, it's a wonderful piece, folks. Make sure to go read it. We appreciate your coverage. Bradley, you wrote a piece this week about a new wildlife rescue center down in Corpus Christi. A little different from your usual beats here. Tell us about it.
So I had the pleasure of going down to an event at the Texas State Aquarium on Friday, and it was a fundraiser for this new wildlife rescue center. Really cool event. If you've never been to the aquarium itself, it's awesome. I recommend you go. It's down in Corpus Christi, but the fundraiser was for like operations expenses for this new wildlife rescue center, and it's being built literally adjacent on the same property to the aquarium. You can see it if you go there. You can see the construction going on right now, and it's a $15 million expenditure. And it's an interesting medley of financing. You've got a couple million from the Port of Corpus Christi. You've got a couple million from a local bond that was passed in 2020 in the city of Corpus. And then you've got money from the Texas Department of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. I can never get that acronym correct. The state itself. I think ExxonMobil was a significant donor to this. A couple other oil and gas companies with lower but still pretty large contributions, individual donors. It's an interesting array of financing that they've got for this thing. But It's intended to expand the aquarium's capacity for dealing with injured species. Animals they see come through a lot are like loggerhead turtles, which oddly enough I found out during this are just kind of randomly, and we don't really know why, just washing ashore. Now they're not like all dying. Some of them are, but they're just washing ashore, and we haven't figured out why. And so there's many loggerhead turtles at the aquarium right now, and then will be housed and rehabbed at this new center. And animals like dolphins,
love a good
otters, birds, all kinds of different species that are native to that area that will just naturally need rehab here and there for various injuries that they succumb to. And so it's a really interesting project. I recommend you read the piece, but they said they will open on March 2nd at full capacity. And so already they've got more than enough to work with.
Wow. Well, Bradley, thank you for that. Matthew, we are coming back to you as our final story for this podcast. A state district judge in Odessa received a public admonishment from the State Judicial Conduct Commission over his referring to COVID as the China virus. Tell us what's going on here.
That's right, Mackenzie. So a state district judge based in Odessa or Ector County received a public admonishment from the State Judicial Conduct Commission because during the course of the early phases of a trial, he referenced the COVID-19 virus as, quote, the China virus, which reportedly made an Asian juror candidate feel uncomfortable. And whenever the judge's behavior was encouraged by applause from the rest of the jurors, it made her feel even more uncomfortable. And so from that, a complaint was filed with the Conduct Commission, which ultimately resulted in him receiving the public admonishment and an order to receive an hour of continuing education.
Got it. Well, that is pretty spicy there. Thank you for covering that for us. And it's definitely worth a read at the Texan.news. Gentlemen, real fast before we wrap up this podcast, we had a lot to talk about today. We are going to go into the tweetery section here. Brad, let's start with you. What did you find on Twitter this week?
So I saw this tweet from Gianluca Grimaldi.
I like your accent there. Yeah. That was pretty good.
I channeled my, even though this dude's Italian, I channeled my high school Spanish to pronounce that.
You use some of the same mechanics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It's related. He is a environmental scientist, it looks like. And there's a picture of him and 5 or 6 other individuals. They are protesting at Volkswagen, protesting in a new Porsche showroom. I guess protesting, fossil fuels and whatnot. But they have glued their hands to the floor. Now, one thing they did not account for of this, a 24-hour or more protest that they were about to undertake was that some of them would have to go to the bathroom or maybe eat or both.
Ew.
And they did not account for that. And so this Mr. Grimaldi tweeted, Volkswagen told us that they supported our right to protest, but they refused our request to provide us with a bowl to urinate and defecate in a decent manner while we are glued and have turned off the heating. People in support can't get out of the building. Just seems like it's their own dang fault. I
think they thought that one through all the way.
Yeah, you'd think if you were prepared, you would plan to bring a bucket. I don't know. It seems like
depends.
A natural line of thinking.
That's right.
But instead, they're going to complain about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm sure the company whose property they're invading is real sympathetic to their trials and travails going on right now. So yeah, there's that.
It's pretty spicy, Bradley. Okay, well, I don't know who can top that, but Hayden, we're going to come to you and try and make you top that. delightful little Twitter story.
Governor Abbott tweeted a New York Post story, emphasis on New York Post story. Take it with a grain of salt. There was a report apparently that Chris Magnus, the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, was falling asleep during meetings and dozing off and then waking up and talking about things that were not pertinent to what had been discussed in the meeting. And he is saying that it's because of his multiple sclerosis and medication that he's taking. But I think it's interesting that Abbott is highlighting this, especially given he is going to be on the ballot next month, and every little bit of jabs that he can make at the Biden White House and the people he has hired counts this close to the election.
Yeah. I am glad that nobody watches whether or not I fall asleep during things.
Like the podcast.
Like I'm just snoozing on the job all the time here. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean, I fall asleep during movies all the time. Like I don't know. The lull of a movie, I just conk out right away.
I feel like there's a difference between falling asleep at a movie and falling asleep at some
I
briefing.
think so.
Or like a law enforcement officer's funeral.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Which if
That
we were
came up in the
or
debate.
anyone's funeral.
I didn't mention
or
that,
anyone's
but
funeral. Yeah, 100%.
one of the backbencher candidates during the mayoral debate criticized Adler for falling asleep at the funeral. So that was a theme that I left out.
Pretty spicy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew, what do you got?
I have all kinds of fun stuff. Something that actually came my way while we were recording the podcast, some breaking news out of Midland. The West Texas spokesperson / public information officer for the Department of Transportation, TxDOT, has been arrested by the Department of Public Safety and Midland Sheriff's Office in a prostitution sting. Apparently, he was one of 8 Johns that was arrested in the sting, and I'm also being told that he was arrested in previous years as part of the infamous Healing Touch prostitution sting in Odessa, being one of the Johns there. So that's a story that just came our way, and I'll be looking at it, and we might potentially write something on it. But I thought that was some interesting breaking news that came through. One fun tweetery thing that I saw was the British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, lasted only 45 days in her office. One fun fact about it is after her 45 days of service, she will be getting 115,000 British pounds for life salary, which is equivalent to 129,319 American bucks.
How do I get that gig?
Yeah.
Mackenzie, can you fire me and just give me the salary for the rest of my life?
Sure.
Oh, cool.
Great.
And the last fun thing that I saw about this was former White House spokesperson Anthony Sacramucci tweeted out that her term in service lasted 4.1 Sacramuccis.
You mean Scaramucci's?
Scaramucci's.
Eden's little eyebrows went. Scaramucci's. There you go. Well, that's pretty spicy stuff. Thank you, Matthew. I think that's what okay, the next angry email I get from a listener is going to be not about good stuff. It's going to be about me saying spicy. I just watch.
Well, now you're putting it in their minds, and now you're definitely going
Or maybe I'm mitigating it and showing them that I'm self-aware.
Okay.
If you squint really hard, maybe that's what it could be construed as. On Twitter this week, I saw Sarah Gonzalez. She's a Blaze TV host, host of the news and Why It Matters. She was on Tucker Carlson this week. Here's her tweet. I'm proud to announce a new venture of mine, Defend Our Kids, Texas, where we will be working overtime to get drag shows for kids shut down for good. And Texas is only the beginning. Now, she's based out of Texas, but her show is the Blaze broadcast nationally. Interesting to watch this kind of break into the mainstream outside of Texas in some ways. And interesting in that the legislative session starts in T-minus 2 months here, 3 months. And she directly spoke about Comptroller Glenn Hager in some of her media appearances as well as she was announcing this new initiative. So we'll see what happens there, but more pressure being mounted on Texas state officials to address this problem.
She's also been quite involved in Texas politics this year. Like you said, she's a national pundit talks about national politics. But she lives in Texas, so obviously it pertains to her. And I remember she was at a Beto event earlier this year and ended up getting kicked out. She was just recording, at least as far as the video that I watched. She was recording and trying to ask a question. Obviously a very pointed question because she's no fan of Beto O'Rourke, but got kicked out of there, and that kind of caused a hubbub. But it seems like she's been increasingly involved in state politics. And
well, and she didn't just get kicked out. The cop tried to physically remove her, and then another cop came, and I don't know exactly what the exchange was, but the second officer was much less confrontational, and they had a conversation as opposed to this other one who approached her and barely said anything and just tried to whisk her away.
Yeah. My gosh. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. And again, I think it shows a lot about this. This policy argument is not a trend in conservative circles. And Democrats certainly are still talking about it as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens during the legislative session. There you go. Okay, real fast, gentlemen, I want to talk about a fun topic. We have a few minutes here, so we have time. And I was not sure whether or not we would.
We do? I was hoping that we were out of time.
I hated its face when I said that. I was very disappointed. Okay, worst job. I'll start while y'all can noodle. The worst job you've ever had. I don't really have anything that's that spicy or crazy. I worked at a coffee shop, like a drive-through coffee stand, for a lot of my high school and collegiate years. And it was sweet little wine country in Washington. In Washington, they have a lot of coffee shops where the baristas are not fully clothed. And so creepy people would drive up to the stand and expect something that was absolutely not happening. And the owner of the shop, there were like 3 owners. It changed hands 3 different times. The first owner I worked for would accuse me and a friend of mine who also worked there of stealing, not money, but the cups that you'd put the hot coffee in. And we'd be like, no, we're not stealing.
So what, you're just running a styrofoam coffee
Literally,
cup ring out of your job?
I think she was so paranoid, and she would literally accuse us of stealing, styrofoam, cardboard cups, which was insane. And it was like, no, we had customers come through, and they bought coffee, and we put the coffee in a cup.
She refused to believe that you had customers.
I know. I was like, you can look at the receipts, like our revenue each day. The cash is in there, like literally. And also, we were like very goody two shoe homeschool girl. Like we were not going to be the ones stealing anything, much less cups from the coffee stand. Anyways,
I have one.
And bring it on, Matt.
So growing up, I worked in my family's jewelry store. My parents own a jewelry store. And so from the very early parts of me working there, I had to do all of the grunt work, terrible jobs around the store, sweeping the floor and this and that. And the one oddball aspect of my job that I didn't like the worst was at the time, gold had really spiked, the price of gold, and people were bringing in all kinds of broken rings and chains and things like that to sell. And the price had gone up so much that I don't know where it was coming from. It's just gross, but teeth with gold in it.
Whoa.
And of course, to melt it down, you have to get the tooth out of the gold. And so my dad would come to me with a bag of teeth and a hammer.
Oh my goodness.
And my job was to bust the teeth out of the gold and get it ready to melt. And it was just so gross.
That's way better. Way better than my story.
Which is kind of a great pre-Halloween story.
Yeah, it's very true. A great pre-Halloween story. Hayden, what about you?
I worked at a department store. And if you have never worked at a department store, I will say this. It is not a fun job. It is one that you're happy when you give your notice.
Yeah.
But I will say, once you have seen a 50-year-old adult throw a full-blown temper tantrum over a 15% off coupon.
Oh my gosh.
It really changes your perspective of life and makes you care a lot less what other people think.
Oh my gosh. There's a lesson in that for all of us, is there not? Oh my gosh. We specifically have this topic today because when we started the pod, we did a sound check. Hayden, as his sound check, said, what did you say, Hayden?
I said, the store will be closing in 30 minutes. Please make your final purchases.
And I was like, dang, that came out so easily. He goes, yeah, I worked at a department store. Bradley, what about you?
Well, I have worked at a cemetery cutting grass and
I forgot about that.
and weed whacking, which was no fun. I've worked at a movie theater, and that wasn't very fun. But by far, the worst job I've had was a dishwasher at Red Lobster.
Oh, Brad.
It was terrible.
I was wondering when you were going to bring up Red Lobster.
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of those biscuits, though?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
So that was like the only perk. You could eat as many
those
biscuits as you
biscuits
wanted.
are so good.
I stuffed myself silly with those things. But I had to in order to cope with the damage I was doing to myself.
How old were you?
This was in high school.
How old were you at yours, Hayden?
18, 19.
18? Yeah, okay.
And so they have this massive dishwasher, which of course you have to because you have so many dishes to go through. You can't do it all by hand, but it's scathing hot, and you have to shove the tray with all the dishes stacked in there, and they come out incredibly hot, but you got to get the dishes to the stations immediately because they're running out of dishes. And so I'm carrying this massive pile of incredibly hot steaming dishes that's burning my hands.
Did you ever drop them?
No, I never dropped any
Oh.
dishes, thank God.
That's awesome.
But then the worst part was you'd have these tubs of solution that was supposed to like dissolve or loosen up the food
So
that was
gross.
like crusted to these dishes, and the wait staff would just throw them in, and so I'd get splashed in the face with these chemicals and pieces of food and crap like that, and it was not fun. So that was another instance where I really enjoyed the moment of putting in my 2 weeks. It was fantastic. So
That's really gross.
yeah.
Well, boys, you really, that did not disappoint. Thank
Good.
you all
I'm glad that we got a 5-star rating
for
on
my personal
on
amusement.
our worst job descriptions.
100%. Well, folks, we so appreciate you listening to us each and every week, and we will catch you next time. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoy our show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want more of our stories, subscribe to The Texan at thetexan.news. Follow us on social media for the latest in Texas politics, and send any questions for our team to our mailbag by DMing us on Twitter or shooting an email to editor@thetexan.news. We are funded entirely by readers and listeners like you, so thank you again for your support. Tune in next week for another episode of our weekly Roundup. God bless you, and God bless Texas.